The Sith have built some of the most terrifying machines in galactic history. From stealth fighters to planet-killing dreadnoughts, every ship was designed to make the galaxy afraid. Today, I'm breaking down every major Sith spacecraft and what made them dangerous. Starting with a ship so personal, it was basically a lightsaber with an engine bolted to it. The Scimitar, Sith Infiltrator. There's something almost romantic about a Sith Lord and his personal murder ship. The Scimitar was a 26.5-meter Sith infiltrator built for one purpose, letting Darth Maul show up where nobody expected him and ruin everyone's day. This thing had cloaking technology that predated mainstream galactic cloaking systems by decades. Laser cannons, plasma torpedoes, deployable probe droids. For a ship its size, it had zero business being that dangerous. But here's the thing. Maul didn't just pilot the Scimitar. His force sensitivity let him push the ship past its own design limits, turning a stealth craft into a guided missile with opinions. It earned its reputation as the vessel of the Phantom Menace because nothing else in the galaxy moved like it. And when Obi-Wan cut Maul in half on Naboo, Sidious recovered the ship. Because of course he did. You don't leave the most advanced infiltration platform in the galaxy collecting dust on a landing pad. But if the Scimitar was a personal weapon for one Sith, the next ship was built for an entire empire's worth of them, the Fury-class Interceptor. If the Scimitar was about sneaking up on you, the Fury-class Interceptor was about punching you in the face before you even knew there was a fight. This thing was 25 meters of pure distilled Sith aggression with zero interest in self-preservation. Here's the thing, it had a hyperdrive rivaling ships 10 times its size, multiple laser cannons, and a guided missile system, all crammed into a starfighter. Every single engagement was designed as an all-or-nothing opening strike. You either obliterated your target in the first pass or you were already dead. But here's where it gets complicated. The Fury class had the defensive capability of a wet napkin. Minimal shields, paper-thin hull plating, zero redundancy. One lucky shot from a half-awake gunner, and the whole thing folded like a lawn chair. And because the fuel reserves were basically non-existent, you couldn't even run away if things went sideways. You had enough juice to get there, start a fight, and hopefully win it. That was the entire operational plan. It's the most Sith ship ever built. All offense, no backup plan, and absolutely no interest in what happens if something goes wrong. But if you think reckless aggression is a design flaw, wait until you see what Vader did when the Empire gave him his own personal fighter, Darth Vader's TIE Advanced X1. Everyone knows what Vader's TIE looks like. That bent-wing black silhouette is burned into the brain of every person who's ever watched Star Wars. But here's the thing nobody really thinks about. The TIE Advanced X1 wasn't just a ship Vader happened to fly. It was specifically engineered to be everything a standard TIE wasn't. A 9.2-meter fighter with twin laser cannons, actual shields, and an independent hyperdrive, which no regular TIE pilot was getting anywhere near. Several prototypes were flown by elite Imperial pilots. But Vader's personal vessel was the one that mattered, because the real nightmare was what happened when you put a Sith Lord inside it. Vader's force prescience merged with the ship's systems to create something that felt almost alive in combat. He wasn't reacting to enemy pilots, he was reacting to what they were about to do. Alliance pilots figured out pretty quickly that a black TIE advanced on sensors meant you were probably already dead. Other pilots could fly the X-1 and fly it well, but in Vader's hands, the gap between elite Imperial craft and unstoppable killing machine was the Force itself. The hardware was impressive. The pilot made it legendary. But if a single fighter elevated by one Sith Lord sounds excessive, wait until you see what happens when the Sith build something the size of a small moon and strap experimental weapons to it. The Malevolence. Most warships in Star Wars want to blow you up. The Malevolence wanted something worse. It wanted to turn your ship into a coffin. This 4,845-meter separatist behemoth carried paired mega-ion cannons that could disable entire starship formations in a single salvo. Not destroy, disable. Engines, weapons, communications, life support, all of it gone. You're just floating there in the dark, suffocating, watching your oxygen tick down to zero, which is, not ideal. And General Grievous knew exactly how to use it. He'd activate the experimental cloaking system, sneak up on isolated convoys and medical stations, fire the ion cannons, and then pick apart the helpless wreckage at his leisure, medical facilities. He was deliberately targeting medical facilities. Hey, where should we aim this weapon of mass suffering? How about the hospital? Perfect. But here's the thing. The malevolence was experimental, and experimental means flawed. The ion cannons needed lengthy recharge cycles between firings, leaving the ship basically defenseless. Republic forces figured this out and started swarming it with fighters during those windows, chipping away at a ship that could kill fleets but couldn't swat a handful of bombers. The final blow came when Anakin Skywalker engineered a hyperspace collision straight into the Malevolence's weakened rear shields. One jump, and the most terrifying weapon in the Separatist Navy was scrap metal. But if the Malevolence was Grievous at his most creative, wait until you see the ship he actually called home. The Invisible Hand. Most flagships get destroyed. That's just how it goes. But the Invisible Hand is interesting because it wasn't picked off in some routine fleet engagement. It was boarded by Jedi, ripped in half, and crash-landed on Coruscant. That sequence tells you everything about how important this ship actually was. The Invisible Hand was a 1,088-meter Separatist warship serving as General Grievous's personal mobile command center. It carried turbo lasers, laser cannons, and massive complements of battle droids. Solid ship, well-armed, but the weapons weren't the point. Here's the thing. The Invisible Hand functioned as the central nervous system of the entire Separatist military. Its communication arrays coordinated whole fleets across the Outer Rim. Every major operation, every tactical decision flowed through this one hull. And Grievous, being Grievous, made himself the beating heart of all of it. You know what that makes you? The single point of failure for an entire galactic military. The Republic figured this out. When Anakin and Obi-Wan launched their rescue operation, the battle tore the Invisible Hand apart. Grievous escaped in a pod, because of course he did, and the forward half plummeted toward Coruscant's surface. The flagship that coordinated the Separatist war effort didn't go down in some glorious last stand. It broke in two and belly flopped onto a landing strip. Grievous built the most efficient military headquarters in the galaxy and then painted a giant target on it, which is, not ideal. But if the Invisible Hand was a command center pretending to be a warship, the next ship is a warship that never had to pretend to be anything, the Devastator. You know this ship. Even if you don't know its name, you know this ship. The Imperial Star Destroyer is the most recognizable warship in science fiction, and the Devastator is the one that kicked the door down in the very first scene of the very first Star Wars movie. 1,600 meters of wedge-shaped tyranny, armed with turbo lasers, ion cannons, tractor beams, and full squadrons of TIE fighters ready to launch at a moment's notice. The Devastator wasn't flashy, it wasn't experimental. It was the bread and butter of Imperial naval dominance. And honestly, it didn't need to be anything more than what it was. That wedge-shaped silhouette dropping out of hyperspace above your planet was often enough to end a conflict before it started. Entire systems surrendered just because one of these things showed up in orbit. But here's the thing. For all its firepower and intimidation factor, the Star Destroyer class has one of the most baffling design flaws in military history. The shield geometry left gaps because of the hull's sheer size. The aft sections were significantly less armored than the front. And then there's the bridge tower just sitting up there on top of the ship like a birthday candle on a cake, completely exposed. One targeted strike on that tower and you decapitate the entire command structure, even if the rest of the ship is perfectly fine. It's Imperial arrogance in physical form. Build the scariest thing in the galaxy, then stick the brain on the outside. But if the Devastator represents the Empire's standard issue Iron Fist, the First Order decided that fist wasn't big enough. The Finalizer. The Finalizer is a Resurgent-class Star Destroyer stretching roughly 2,916 meters long, and on paper, it's everything the First Order wanted the galaxy to see. Advanced turbo lasers, electronic warfare suites, sophisticated enough to generate false sensor readings and scramble enemy communications, and a hyperdrive system built for rapid strategic repositioning. This thing was designed to show up fast, hit hard, and make sure nobody could call for help while it happened. General Hux commanded the Finalizer with the kind of rigid, obsessive discipline you'd expect from a man who probably ironed his socks. This was the ship that hunted the map to Luke Skywalker, that deployed Kylo Ren to Jakku, that served as the First Order's forward blade during its most critical operations. Hux treated the bridge like a personal throne room, and that's where the problem started. The Finalizer's fatal flaw wasn't a shield gap or a reactor vulnerability, it was ego. Hux didn't just command this ship, he wore it like a crown. The finalizer became the physical manifestation of his authority, but his obsession with control meant he was constantly at odds with Kylo Ren, who treated the entire vessel like his personal anger management facility. Consoles got slashed, officers flinched every time Ren walked onto the bridge, and Hux could do absolutely nothing about it. You can run the tightest ship in the fleet, but it doesn't matter when a force-wielding maniac is carving up your equipment every time he gets bad news. Sometimes the most dangerous thing on your flagship is the guy standing next to you on the bridge, which is, not ideal, but if you think clashing egos can sink a Star Destroyer, wait until you see what happens when you scale that concept up to 19,000 meters. The Executor, Super Star Destroyer, 19 kilometers. That's how long the Executor was. You could line up nearly 12 standard Star Destroyers end to end and still not match this thing's length. Darth Vader's personal flagship wasn't just a ship. It was a floating empire. The Executor carried hundreds of turbo-laser batteries, tractor beams powerful enough to snag capital ships out of the sky, and interceptor squadrons that made a regular Star Destroyer's fighter complement look like a hobby collection. You didn't fight the Executor, you just sort of existed near it until it decided you shouldn't anymore. And commanding all of this was Vader himself, who maintained crew discipline through a unique management style, military professionalism, and casual force choking. If you were a captain aboard the Executor and you disappointed Lord Vader, your career ended, along with your breathing, which is one way to run a tight ship. But here's where it gets ironic. That reputation for strangling anyone who failed him, it might have been the exact thing that killed the Executor. During the Battle of Endor, a single rebel A-wing crashed into the bridge deflector shields. The shields went down, the bridge was exposed, and the officers inside needed to act fast. Instead, they panicked. 19 kilometers of the most powerful warship in the Imperial fleet, and it went nose first into the Death Star 2, because the guys at the controls were too terrified of Vader to think straight. Turns out, when you execute every officer who makes a mistake, the survivors don't get braver, they just freeze. Pretty expensive lesson in management theory. But if the Executor's size was its downfall, wait until you see what the First Order built when they decided bigger was still better. The Supremacy. Snoke's Megastar Destroyer was, on paper, the most ambitious warship ever constructed. Spanning roughly 13,000 meters in length, it was actually shorter than the Executor, but its 60-kilometer wingspan gave it a total volume that dwarfed anything the Empire ever built. This wasn't just a flagship, it was a floating capital city. The Supremacy functioned as the central nervous system of the entire First Order military apparatus, housing advanced targeting systems, massive starfighter complements, and command and control arrays that coordinated operations across the galaxy in real time. Supreme Leader Snoke commanded the Supremacy with strategic patience, treating it less like a warship and more like an impregnable mobile throne room. He directed galactic conquest from its bridge with the calm certainty of someone who genuinely believed nothing in the universe could touch him. His confidence in the vessel's invulnerability was so absolute that he maintained his command center aboard even during active combat operations. Why wouldn't he? The thing was basically a country with engines. But here's where hubris writes, a check the hull can't cash. The Supremacy was cleaved nearly in half when Vice Admiral Holdo executed a hyperspace ram with a single resistance cruiser. One ship, one person, willing to die. That's all it took. The concentrated kinetic energy of a vessel jumping to light speed directly through your hull turns out to be something no amount of shielding was designed to handle, which is, not ideal when your entire military infrastructure lives inside one target. It's the ultimate size is an everything moment in Star Wars history. Snoke built a ship so massive, he forgot that invulnerability is a feeling, not a fact. And one woman with nothing left to lose proved the difference. But if the Supremacy's planet killer cosplay ended in embarrassment, wait until you see what the Final Order strapped to every single Star Destroyer in their fleet. The Ziston-class destroyer. Palpatine looked at the Death Star, a moon-sized battle station that took decades to build and was destroyed twice, and thought, what if I made that smaller and put it on every single ship? That's the Ziston-class Star Destroyer. 3,000 meters of Final Order engineering, each one mounting an axial superlaser capable of cracking a planet from orbit. Not one planet killer, not two. An entire fleet of them, hundreds of Star Destroyers that could each do what the Death Star did, individually, from the comfort of low orbit, cool. That's also a thing that happened. But here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. These ships weren't crewed by standard Imperial recruits or drafted civilians. Every single officer aboard those destroyers was cultivated in secret on Exegol for decades, selected specifically for absolute ruthlessness and the psychological capacity to execute orders that would result in the deaths of billions without flinching. An entire generation of people raised from birth with one job: operate apocalyptic weapons and feel nothing about it. That's not a military, that's a factory for producing sociopaths. So you've got hundreds of planet-killing warships crewed by people who were literally engineered to not care about genocide. Unstoppable, right? Turns out, no. The entire Zistan fleet required a shared navigation signal broadcast from a single tower on Exegol just to leave the atmosphere. One signal, one tower. Every planet killer in the fleet was grounded without it. The most destructive armada ever assembled couldn't find the exit. Palpatine miniaturized the Death Star's greatest weapon, mass-produced it, handed it to an army of zealots, and then made the whole thing dependent on what was essentially a Wi-Fi router. It's the most Sith thing imaginable. Unlimited power, undone by centralized control obsession. But if you think a fleet of planet killers sounds excessive, wait until you see what happens when the Sith put a super laser on something even bigger. The Eclipse-class Dreadnought. At some point, building a bigger ship stops being a military decision and becomes a psychological disorder. The Eclipse-class Dreadnought is where the Sith crossed that line and kept walking. This thing measured 1,700 meters long. A regular Star Destroyer is 600 meters, and people already considered those overkill. The Eclipse was 11 of those stacked end to end, and building it required the entire industrial output of a galactic sector, not a planet, a sector. Every factory, every shipyard, every resource pipeline in an entire region of space, all funneled into one ship, which is, not ideal for your regional economy. But here's what made it truly terrifying. The Eclipse carried a super laser capable of cracking a planet's crust wide open, not vaporizing the whole thing like the Death Star, but surgically selecting what it wanted to destroy. Precision apocalypse. On top of that, the ship was wrapped in overlapping shield systems, powerful enough to absorb sustained fire from entire enemy fleets. You could throw everything you had at it, and the Eclipse would just sit there, mildly inconvenienced. Command authority was restricted to officers who answered directly to the Sith Emperor. Their identities were classified, not low-level classified, the kind where even knowing who captained this ship was considered a strategic intelligence asset. The Sith kept the Eclipse's existence hidden from their own allies because merely acknowledging it gave enemies something to plan against. But the fatal flaw was the super laser's charging cycle. Between shots, the most powerful warship ever built became temporarily vulnerable. A coordinated assault combining an external fleet attack with internal sabotage during that exact window brought it down. Killed from the inside while catching its breath. Turns out, even a planet killer has to exhale eventually. But if you think a ship that cracks planets is the ceiling for Sith engineering, you haven't met the weapon that kills stars. The Sun Crusher. 60 meters. That's it. The Sun Crusher was 60 meters long, smaller than most freighters hauling cargo across the outer rim, and it could destroy entire star systems. Here's how it worked. The Sun Crusher fired resonance torpedoes directly into stars. Not at planets, not at fleets, at stars. The torpedoes destabilized the star's core, triggering a supernova that annihilated everything orbiting it. Every planet, every moon, every station, every living thing. One shot, one system, billions dead. And the ship that did all of this could be crewed by a skeleton team with zero supply lines. A self-sufficient apocalypse the size of a yacht. The shielding was equivalent to capital ships dozens of times its size, and the acceleration was so extreme that nothing larger could catch it. You couldn't outgun it, you couldn't outrun it, and you couldn't hide from it because it didn't need to find you. It just needed to find your son. Even Imperial leadership kept its existence buried. The Sun Crusher was a secret Navy project hidden away under Admiral Dalla's oversight. When the people who build planet killers for fun look at something and go, yeah, let's maybe keep this one quiet, you've crossed a line. And that's exactly how it met its end. Not by a bigger weapon, not by a fleet, by being dragged into the gravitational maw of a black hole because the only way to stop a star killer was to throw it somewhere even a star killer couldn't survive, which is, the most Imperial thing imaginable. Overwhelming power married to the absolute arrogance that something this dangerous can actually be controlled. The galaxy's most destructive weapon didn't need an enemy. It was always its own worst one. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.